It's February 4, 2021. I'm Todd Dunn, and this is the first in a series of videos titled, So You'd Like to Move to Mount Desert Island. In this video, I'm going to talk about housing. Now what I'm going to do is detail housing by looking at the different towns on the island. And I'll go into what those towns are in just a second. Before I do that, though, I have to address another critical aspect of housing on the island, and that is the availability of rental housing. Basically, there is almost no long-term rental housing on Mount Desert Island. And the reason for that is tied to the fact that Mount Desert Island is a big tourist destination because of Acadia National Park, and because the island is quite a long way from the nearest significant population center, Boston. The vast majority of the people that come here to go to Acadia National Park stay for several days to a week or more. And that really impacts housing. It impacts rental housing because people who own rental housing can rent that housing in blocks of a few days to a week or more during the season for a lot more than they can get from it by renting it out long term. And the contrast is pretty significant. The typical weekly rental rate for a small house, for example, will be maybe as much as twice what the same house would get as a monthly rental in the year-round market. And furthermore, although the tourist season is only about half the year, a lot of landlords don't want to bother with renting the house out to somebody over the winter, because then they have the hassle of making sure that people are out of the house and the house is ready to go back into the short-term rental market for the tourist season. So a lot of houses that are in the short-term rental market sit empty over the winter. So that really defines the housing market here on the island for somebody who wants to come and live here. For the most part, you simply can't find a year-round rental property. There are a few, but they make up a very small percentage of housing availability. Which means basically that if you move here, you're going to have to buy a house. So let's look at homes for sale on Mount Desert Island right now in February 2021. And I'm going to do that by towns on the island. So we're going to start by looking at the towns on Mount Desert Island. All land in Maine is divided into municipalities. Those consist of cities, towns, plantations, and what are called unorganized townships. Those are mostly in the forest in northern and western Maine. Mount Desert Island, consequently, is divided up into 4 towns, and they're shown on the map here. In the north, there's Bar Harbor. Going across the center of the island is Mount Desert. In the southeast part of the island is Southwest Harbor, and the southwest part of the island is the town of Tremont. This map also shows the extent of Acadia National Park on the island in light green, and you can see that the town of Bar Harbor has made up about 60% of Acadia National Park and about 40% of private land. Mount Desert is similar. Southwest Harbor is about half private, half Acadia National Park, and Tremont is about 1/3 Acadia National Park and 2/3 private. So let's look at these towns individually. This map shows the town of Bar Harbor across the northern part of the island. Bar Harbor is the largest town on the island. It's 5,235 people, make up just under half the total population of the island, and the town constitutes about 39% of the land area of Mount Desert Island. Within the town of Bar Harbor, there are 3 primary villages and a couple of others that aren't that important, and I won't be mentioning them. The primary village in Bar Harbor is the village of Bar Harbor itself, in the northeast part of the island, shown in blue here. That's where the bulk of the residential housing in the town is located, and also where the bulk of the commercial activity within the town is located. A bit to the northwest of the town of Bar Harbor, along the northern shore of the island, is the village of Hull's Cove, shown in red. This is also a residential and commercial concentration, but it's much smaller than the village of Bar Harbor itself. And in the western part of the town, there's a vertical strip there in green, which is the village of Town Hill. This is primarily a commercial area with some hardware stores, a convenience store, a couple banks, and a few other things, that's centered along Highway 2, which is the principal north-south highway on the western side of Mount Desert Island. The next town on the island is Mount Desert. It goes across the middle of the island, and it is much smaller in population than Bar Harbor, with only about 2,100 people, or about 20% of the population of the island, and area-wise it makes up about a third of the island. There are 4 principal villages that are also residential areas within the town of Mount Desert. They are Otter Creek, which is the small red blob in the northeast part of the town, near the eastern side of the island. That is basically a residential area. It's not very big. Its main claim to fame is it's right next to the Blackwoods Campground in Acadia National Park, and it does have some commercial activity tied to Blackwoods Campground, providing camping supplies and that sort of stuff. Southwest of Otter Creek, shown in green, is the village of Seal Harbor, right along Seal Harbor itself. And it is a small concentration of housing. There's very little commercial activity there. I think there's 1 restaurant. A lot of the housing in Seal Harbor is large estates that are primarily summer homes, but there is, in the northern part of the village, a bit more affordable housing. And as we move west along the shore of the island, we get to the blue area, which is Northeast Harbor. This is the primary residential concentration within the town of Mount Desert. It is mostly on the western side of the harbor, Northeast Harbor, and extends all the way over to Somes Sound, and has about a third of the total housing within the town of Mount Desert. And up at the northern end of Somes Sound, which is the body of water extending up the middle of the island, is the village of Somesville, which is also on Route 2. And it is a fairly small village, almost no commercial activity, and it's pretty much restricted to right along the highway, although there's a little bit more housing to the west of Route 2. The next town we're going to look at is the town of Southwest Harbor. It's located on the southwest part of the island with the red hatching here. It has a little bit smaller population than Mount Desert, with about 1,764 people, about 16% of the population of the island, and it makes up about 1/8 of the area of Mount Desert Island. The main residential area is the village of Southwest Harbor, which is along the northern side of the harbor, Southwest Harbor, and also to the west of the harbor. And also there's another secondary village called Manset, which runs along the highway that goes out to the seawall area of Acadia National Park. And this residential area is basically just houses on either side of Route 2A, which is the highway there. And there are scattered houses in the rest of the town, but there are no other housing concentrations. And the village of Southwest Harbor itself is the secondary concentration of economic activity on the island after the village of Bar Harbor. And the final town on Mount Desert Island is the town of Tremont on the southwest side of the island. It has about 1,600 people, or about 15% of the population of the island, and makes up about 15% of the land area of the island. It is divided up into 4 villages, and I've color-coded the areas where those villages are. Bass Harbor is shown in blue. It's on the west and north sides of the harbor, of Bass Harbor there on the southern tip of the island, and is basically a housing area. The only commercial activity there is a convenience store, a couple of seasonal restaurants. On the west side of Bass Harbor is the village of Bernard, which is a housing area except for a couple of small boat storage areas and Thurston's lobster restaurant, which is open seasonally. As we continue north away from the harbor and up the west side of the island, we'll pass through the villages of West Tremont and Seal Cove, and about the only thing in these 2 villages is very small concentrations of housing and a post office in each location. So those are the major villages on the island within the 4 towns. So now that we know what the political geography of the island looks like, I'd like to look at the housing that's available for sale right now in February 2021 on Mount Desert Island. And I'm going to do it by town. First off, let's look at Bar Harbor. And what I've got for each town is a category and a location. On the vertical axis of this chart for each town, we've got the minimum and maximum price for real estate in each of the categories that I'm going to mention. We've also got the average price, the median price, and the number of properties that are available right now. And as you'll see, there aren't very many properties available. Now the categories I'm using are pretty much a little bit about where the properties are located and also the cost of the properties, and I've also distinguished houses from land. So let's look at Bar Harbor first. You can see here for my Bar Harbor housing, I've got what I call village regular, which are less expensive homes within the village of Bar Harbor itself. And these are homes where I've drawn the cutoff between less expensive and more expensive at $1 million. Right now there are 8 homes for sale in the village of Bar Harbor. Their price ranges from a high of $970,000 to a low of $384,000, and I'll note that the $384,000 property is a condo. And the average housing cost in the village of Bar Harbor is $625,000, and the median is pretty close, $637,000. If we look at expensive properties, they range from a high of $8.4 million to a low of a paltry $1.4 million. Most of these properties are waterfront estates, and many of them have been converted into inns. So although you could buy one of these and use it as a private home, most of these are actually going to sell into the commercial market and be used as inns. The average price of the properties that are available, and there are 7 of them, is $3.3 million, and the median price is $2.75 million. Outside the village of Bar Harbor, there are 10 homes for sale, In the rest of the town of Bar Harbor, all the way across the island, they range from $229,000 to $699,000. And I should note that the listing for the $229,000 property described the garage on the property and said that the house itself was a tear down. So basically this is a piece of land. Average price outside of the village of Bar Harbor is $545,000, and the median price was $640,000. And as I said, there were only 10 houses for sale. There's quite a bit more land for sale, 21 properties altogether, and the range of prices was from $82,000 to $349,000. The more expensive bits of land, and there are 2 pieces of land available in this category, are in the village of Bar Harbor, and they are in the $300,000 to $350,000 range. Average price of land available is $171,000. Median price was $129,000. Land prices depend strongly on where the land is and whether or not it has services. The town of Bar Harbor has both city water and city sewer, but it's not everywhere within the town, and land that is not on city water or city sewer tends to be much cheaper than land that is on city water or city sewer. Now, let's move on to Mount Desert. Like Bar Harbor, the town of Mount Desert has quite a few expensive properties. And of the 15 homes that are for sale in the town of Mount Desert right now, 6 of them are in the expensive category. In other words, they cost more than $1 million. And their prices range from a high of $8.3 million to a low of $1.29 million, with an average of $3.3 million, median $2.75 million. In the less expensive homes, I have a price range from $399,000 to $850,000, with an average price of $679,000 and a median price of $699,000. And there were 9 homes in this sort of regular house category for sale. These homes are mostly in the Soamesville area and on the western part of the town of Mount Desert. There are essentially no homes for sale right now in Otter Creek or Seal Harbor. There were a couple in Northeast Harbor, but they're, except for one, were all in the expensive category. Northeast Harbor is a very expensive place to live, and the rest of the houses are further west. And the further west you go, the cheaper the properties tend to be. Now, land prices are quite variable in Mount Desert, and again, the price is associated with 2 things. Location. Is it waterfront or is it inland? If it's waterfront, it's expensive. That's where the $1.14 million piece of land comes in. That's a waterfront property. And the low end, $79,000, is inland, and it doesn't have any services. No city water, no sewer. Range of prices, as I said, $79,000 to $1.14 million for land. Average price was $323,000, and I did drop the $1.14 million property out of that so that it wouldn't skew the average too much. And the median property was $215,000, and there were 17 pieces of land for sale in Mount Desert. Now, if we move on to Southwest Harbor, on the southwest part of the island, again, we've got expensive properties and what I would call regular properties. There was only one expensive property for sale, and it's a little waterfront cottage. They're asking $2 million for it. There were 10 less expensive properties ranging from $290,000 to $950,000. The low-end property here was again a condominium. And it's a pretty small one, a 2-bedroom apartment basically. Average and median property costs are about the same at $561K for the average and $575K for the median, and 10 homes currently for sale. There were 13 pieces of land for sale, and they ranged from $69,000 at the low end to $289,000 at the high end. The higher end properties were closer to the village of Southwest Harbor. The lower end properties were a little bit more out in the woods and again had no services. Southwest Harbor within the village does have city water and sewer, but the cheaper properties don't have access to either. And average property price $132,000 and median was $100,000, and that's simply because there were quite a few less expensive lots out of the 13 total lots available. And finally, we've got the town of Tremont. Tremont had 13 residential properties available and 5 pieces of land. Remember, this is on the southwest side of the island. There were 2 expensive waterfront properties, one for $1.25 million and the other for $3 million. The average and median don't really mean anything there. And then there were 11 regular properties. They ranged from a low of $238,000 for a seasonal cottage, and seasonal means no insulation and basically probably no water in the winter, to $950,000. The average property cost was $523,000 and the median was $479,000. In terms of land, there's quite a disparity in land prices, from $59,000 for a relatively small lot back in the woods to $419,000 for a waterfront lot on the west side of Bass Harbor, with an average land cost of $194,000 and a median land cost of $130,000. And as I said, there were only 5 pieces of property available. Tremont has no city water or sewer, so any piece of land that you buy in the town of Tremont is going to require a well and a septic system. Another consideration when buying property is, what are the property taxes? In Maine, property is taxed at its full assessed retail value. And so if you buy a home for $400,000, your property tax is going to be based on that $400,000, and with inflation it will go up. Bar Harbor has a property tax rate of 1.19%. or 11.9 mils. If we look at the average home that's for sale right now, and this is the lower cost homes, that means that the property tax will be $7,500 a year. Mount Desert has the lowest property taxes on the island at 0.795%, and that low property tax rate, combined with a little bit less expensive homes than in Bar Harbor, means that the property taxes on the average regular price home for sale right now is only $5,800. Southwest Harbor has the highest property taxes on the island, and at 1.439%. And because the property values there are also relatively high, you're looking at an $8,100 a year property tax bill on the average home currently for sale. And Tremont is the second lowest property taxes on the island at 1.069%. And because the homes there are a little bit less expensive than any place else on the island, the property tax on the average home currently for sale would only be $5,600 a year. Property taxes on the island reflect a number of different things. They represent the availability of city services, and they also reflect the population base and the number of high-value properties. Bar Harbor, for example, has a mix of high-value properties and a lot of commercial properties that pay relatively high property taxes. Mount Desert, on the other hand, has very few commercial properties, but it has the most expensive residential properties on the island when you consider all of the very, very expensive estates. I mean, there are some that are valued in the $40 to $50 million range. Southwest Harbor has good city services because it's a relatively small town. They can provide them, but because it doesn't have very many people and it doesn't have a huge amount of commercial activity, despite being the secondary commercial hub for the island, has relatively high property taxes, in fact the highest on the island. And Tremont has the second lowest taxes on the island for two reasons. It has essentially no city services. There's no city water, there's no police department, there's no city sewer system. You have to take your own garbage to the dump, basically that. Pretty much all of the tax revenue goes to support the school system and do road maintenance. So that sums up the property tax situation on the island. You can see there's quite a range, almost a factor of 2 in tax rates. So what's that say about cost of housing here on Mount Desert Island? Well, the homes that are for sale right now reflect the fact that it's not a low-cost area to live here in Maine. There are many parts of Maine that are much, much cheaper. However, relative to a big city like New York or San Francisco or even Seattle, housing here is pretty reasonable. But that's relative, because you have to consider the availability of jobs. Unless you're retired and you move to Mount Desert Island, you're going to have to work someplace. And that leads in to the next video in this series, jobs on Mount Desert Island and how much do they pay. So let me make that the lead-in for my next video and say, I hope you enjoyed this video, hope you found it informative. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't, please subscribe to my channel and don't forget to click that notification bell. Thanks for watching.